this session I'm so excited about because we have been doing this session for the last 8 years, as I said. It's called A Look into the Boardroom. And we are so excited to be featuring Prudential Financial as our company in the Look into the Boardroom. And we have Charles Lowrey, the chairman and CEO for Prudential Financial, and Gil Casayas, our board director. But what I'd like to do is also is to bring up our moderator. And he is the lead editor for the Wall Street Journal, and he has over 25 years of experience as a journalist covering business, economic, and financial news. And on top of that, he works closely with colleagues through Dow Jones to ensure the needs of subscribers rely on the needs for news. And this is his third time moderating A Look into the Boardroom. So please welcome our moderator for today from the Wall Street Journal, Wisnefski.
Thank you, Sid. I really appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to participate in this great event once again this year. I'm looking forward to an illuminating and certainly an engaging discussion. Look forward to all of your questions and hoping that you'll take the opportunity to participate as well. So let me introduce our participants, our panelists. First of all, Charlie Lowrey. He's the chairman and CEO of Prudential Financial. Charlie joined Prudential 20 years ago and worked in a variety of leadership roles before ascending to his current position in late 2018. Charlie was trained, interestingly, and started his professional life as an architect before getting into financial services. Gil Casayas is a member of the Prudential Board of Directors. He has been so for 2 decades. He serves as the chair of the Corporate Governance and Business Ethics Committee on the Prudential Board. And he has a long and varied career in both the corporate and private sectors that included a stint as head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So let's get things started. Charles, I'll kick things off with you, and I'd like to have a brief discussion about the Prudential Board's activities to set the scene. So could you tell us how often the board meets? What issues have dominated the agenda lately? In particular, it would be interesting to hear how the pandemic has affected the way the board operates and what it discusses and prioritizes.
Sure. So the board meets 7 times a year. It's a combination of 1-day meetings and some 2-day meetings with a dinner in between. And that's designed on purpose. We discuss a variety of topics, some of which are administrivia, some of which are things that you need to discuss, just board topics, approvals, all sorts of things. And then you get into the meaty discussion about strategy, about I&D, about business performance, about vision. And we provide the board with a series of topics that the lead director and I work out to inform the board on material items that the management is thinking about. This leads to very robust discussions, and management believes in complete transparency with the board. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we are completely again, transparent with the board on all the issues that we talk about. So we have very robust discussions, which usually lead to some follow-up, which can then inform topics for the future as well.
And how have you addressed issues related to the pandemic? What are some of the interesting new things that have come up at the board level as a result of this past year that we've gone through?
Well, one thing in particular is just how to deal with this format. The board is small. It has 13 people. And that's by design so that we can have very interesting and intimate conversations. The dynamic obviously changed at first as we had to get used to this kind of a format. And in particular, we have a strategic offsite once a year, and for 2 days, including 8 or 9 hours one day, we were in this kind of format. So we had to learn how to interact effectively in this format, as we all did. But I think for a board dynamic, when the board's as close as it is, it was difficult. Gil and I also recruited a member who is, during this time, who has never met anyone in person. That provided its own series of challenges. And then finally, I'd say the pandemic itself created a series of topics, whether they were about employee morale, return to work, all the things that you read about that we've been dealing with as a board to make sure that we're acting appropriately.
And just one final question along these lines. What about the way that Prudential thought about its strategy? I mean, obviously, during the pandemic, financial security became an even more important topic for people who all of a sudden realized that their employment might be in jeopardy or faced other challenges. I wonder how Prudential thought about the economic challenges, the fiscal challenges that people faced, and what that meant for how you think about strategy.
Well, first of all, I would say it aligns completely with our purpose, to make lives better for people in a changing world. And we think a lot about financial wellness and how to create value for people over time, whether it's emergency savings, whether it's protection with life insurance. So this is completely aligned with our purpose. In addition, and we can talk about this later, a part of our purpose is helping the communities in which we live and work. And we have a very large impact investing portfolio. We have emergency funds that we deployed. And so we were very active in terms of helping not only our employees in a variety of ways and our customers, but the communities in which we live and work. And that, again, is part of our purpose.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and we can talk a little bit about corporate citizenship a bit later. I want to turn things over to Gil, and Gil, in particular, I'd be interested to hear from you about board composition. The committee that you serve as chairman on is responsible for evaluating candidates for the board. Charlie just said you even had a new candidate come on to the board during the pandemic, and also the board has gone through a pretty significant refresh over the last 5 years or so. So could you talk a little bit about those changes and also about what's important to you in terms of board composition? What sorts of skills and attributes are you looking for in a board member?
Sure. So, our proxy statement actually contains a skills matrix. I think we were one of the first companies to do this, where we lay out the skills of each of our directors. And so when we think about recruiting directors because someone has left the board, we look to our skills matrix, we look at the company's strategic plan, where it's going, and therefore what skills we will need on the board. When you talked about the refresh, so we've had 5 new directors, I think, in the last 5 years. And, people ask me, and since we're at ASED, I'll talk about the diversity of our board. People ask me, well, how did you arrive at a board that 80% of the independent directors are diverse? And I said, well, first and foremost, we decided on what skills we needed. And so at the time, we were being regulated by the Fed. So we wanted someone with experience with Federal Reserve banks. We had lost a retired CEO, so we were interested in someone who was a CEO or recently retired CEO. Our business is global, so we wanted someone with global operational experience all over the world. A big chunk of our business is in Asia, principally in Japan. So having someone with Asia experience was very important to us. And so as we started to look around, we found individuals with those skills, a combination of board members providing leads, as well as working with our external search firm. And we ended up with individuals with all those skill sets. It just so happens that one was Latino, one was African American, one was a woman, and one was openly gay. And so people say, well, how did you do that? Well, we worked at it. We worked at it. And so today, we have 2 African Americans on our board, 2 Latinos, Asian American woman, as I said, LGBT individual, and 3 women. Well, actually 4 women if you count our lead independent director, who's Asian American. So the board composition is important because it's a combination of their skills, their perspectives, their diversity, which is their life experiences. And I think all of that contributes to what I think is really a unique board. Members of our board who serve on other boards regularly say to me privately, and they've said it publicly in meetings, that this is one of the few boards where they really feel that it's unique in the sense that the collegiality, we don't always agree on everything and we challenge one another, but we always come out with, I think, the right decisions as a result of the diversity of our experiences.
You've been on the board, Gil, for 20 years, making you the longest serving member of the Prudential Board of Directors. Why have you been on the board for so long? What is it about Prudential that has led you to stay for so long? And maybe it'd also be interesting to hear what unique perspectives you bring to the role, given your broad experience at other companies and also in the public sector.
Well, I should say at the outset, the reason I've been on the board for 20 years is that the shareholders continue to elect me. So let's start with that. But I have, I have stood for re-election, I guess is the question here. I think, as I said it in the earlier answer, it's a unique group of individuals who I've come to enjoy, like, trust, respect, and can be proud of collectively and individually. I think also it is a very complex business, a very challenging one, and so it's one that I remain interested in and continue to learn from at every board meeting. I remember I've served on the audit committee on and off 3 times, and I was comforted during the first time several years ago when the chairman of the audit committee, who was a retired CEO and had been CFO of a public company, said to us, "This is really complicated stuff." So it gave me some comfort, but it points out that it's a learning experience as well. And then I think finally, I'd like to think that I contribute to, the thinking around the board, its strategy, where it's going, how we respond to the challenges that all companies face, both domestically and globally.
Charlie, certainly a board of directors has to spend a great deal of time, and you touched on some of the things that you do as a matter of course at all of your board meetings, but a great deal of time on financial and business strategy matters, keeping the company running. Where do issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion fit on the board agenda?
They're top of mind. So there's rarely a meeting that goes by where we don't talk about I&D. Not only in the meetings, but between meetings. And I was recalling, Gil, probably the first time I sought your advice and came down to Washington to see you was 12 years ago on diversity. And the issues I was having within the U.S. businesses around trying to recruit more diverse people, and why were we having problems, and what kinds of things could we do? And that was over a decade ago. So we talk about these issues a lot. The board put into place, quite frankly, in 2017, 4 years ago, they put into place metrics and tied our compensation, meaning senior manager compensation, to those metrics for increasing the diversity of Prudential over a 3-year period from 2018 to 2020, so 18, 19, 20. We just put in another set of metrics, which are published. You can see them. We are accountable for them. But they have been thinking about diversity in the truest sense of the word, and inclusion, for over a decade. So there is rarely a meeting that goes by that we don't talk about inclusion and diversity, or bring people in front of the board intentionally, up and comers, so that the board can see the kinds of people we have. So this is front and center for us, and has been for years. This is not a new thing.
If I can add to that,
Sure.
Stephen, the fact that we have such a diverse board, our own individual lived experiences are such that, it's not sort of a separate item all the time, but it is part of who we are. So as Charlie said, it's kind of built into the DNA. So throughout the discussion, I remember various conversations where one of the members of the board, a woman said, "Wait a minute. So why isn't there a woman in this presentation? Or why, with regard to some issue, where do women fit in?" And again, it's something that it may not be a separate item, but it's always top of mind, as Charlie said, just because of who we are. And I think that's the value of having a diverse board, that people's lived experiences, who they are, and by bringing their whole selves to the table, infuses the discussion and actually enriches the discussion at the board level.
And one of the things, not to take over, sorry, but just one other thing, and that is, right before the pandemic, we decided to change the structure of the meetings from more one-day meetings to less meetings, so 7 meetings, some of which are 2-day meetings with a dinner in between. That dinner is specifically for the board to meet up-and-coming, interesting individuals so that they can get to know them over time. And so the whole reason why we went to this is, at the board's request, is show us interesting people, many of whom will be diverse, and let us have dinner with them. Let us start to get to know them. So the board, this is, as Gil says, this is integral to the way they think, and isn't necessary. It's not just an agenda item.
Right. Charlie, you talked about the incentives that people have to meet certain goals. And looking through some of and you said it's out there for folks to see if they want. You're very transparent about the goals you have. A lot of them are tied to diversity, which is not easy to achieve, but that's one level of achievement. A separate sort of task that is often a little bit or a lot more difficult is inclusion. How do you measure inclusion?
We measure inclusion. It's very hard to do. So we do pulse surveys a lot to employees to see how they're feeling. We look at attrition as well. So we look at attrition, we look at retention, we do a lot of data analysis as well. And then one of the metrics we specifically put in there was on how people are feeling about the company, and a gap in that between diverse individuals and white individuals. And as a result of that, we think that is a way of trying to measure this, but we do it in a whole variety of ways. And it's something, in some ways, and I don't mean to underestimate the challenges of diversity, but diversity is about numbers. Inclusion is about feelings. And I won't say it's easy to be a diverse company, because it's not. You have to really work at it, but it's harder to be an inclusive company. And we really want to be an inclusive company. So we spend a lot of time on that. We have 11 business resource groups. I just met with them. In fact, the entire executive leadership team met with them for 2 hours yesterday. How are you feeling? What can we do? How can we help each of the individual groups with their own issues? And there are a lot of issues these days. So we try and touch base with them often to again put our finger on the pulse of how they're feeling and what additional actions we can take to make them feel even more included.
So one of the things, go ahead.
Can I add to that, Stephen?
Yep.
So one of the things that we also do, individual board members have met with and spoken to various employee resource groups over the years. And that's an opportunity really to hear from people how they're feeling, but also to convey to the rank and file, if you will, that the board is paying attention, we're listening, and we're engaged. And all of that really is to drive that employee engagement which leads to feelings of inclusion. So I wanted to add that because I don't know that other companies do it. Maybe they do, but I think almost every board member has met with one or more of our employee resource groups. And
also, we ask board members to call specific employees. So, and there are cases where board members have become mentors for specific employees. And I don't know of other boards that do that, but our board is, that is to say that our board is so engaged with what we're doing and always willing to help out. And it's something that I certainly appreciate greatly, is their willingness to say, sure, I'll call this person. And when we say this person is really important to Prudential, let me call them and emphasize that point and see what I can do to help sort of mentor them.
Charlie, one of the things that happened after the events of last summer with police violence and then the social activism that was created around that was that the company introduced its 9 commitments to racial equity. Could you talk about those commitments and the process that got you there? Because I think it's following up on what you just said. It's all about the listening and engaging and hearing where people are at and then responding to it. Could you talk about that?
Sure. After the events, we had multiple listening sessions. I'm going to say 100 listening sessions, which involved thousands and thousands of employees. And I would say we had sessions before, but they weren't as transparent as these. It was as if the curtain was lifted and people spoke how they actually felt, and we listened. And what was born from those listening sessions were these commitments. And the commitments fall into 3 areas. One is taking action for our people. So to evaluate and improve our talent practices, what can we do differently to make sure that everyone has equal opportunity within the firm, to mandate anti-racism training, those kinds of things. The second was to take actions through our businesses. So to design and deliver products. We were talking earlier about how do we reach more people, especially during the pandemic, but to design products to expand our addressable universe. And the third area was to take actions in society, to accelerate social justice with coming out with a public policy agenda, and to allocate investment resources to help the communities in which we live and work. What we also wanted to do was to make these public, which we did. We published them to make them measurable and to hold ourselves accountable so that we are accountable to all of our stakeholders. And believe me, our employees are watching and they're seeing what we do and how we do it. And they are not shy to say, you can do more here, or we're satisfied there. And we constantly talk to them about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what more we could be doing. So this was a big step for us, and one that we're proud of and that we're holding ourselves accountable to.
Another thing that Prudential did just a few months ago was release a very detailed report on how the company is doing when it comes to environmental, social, and governance issues. And a big part of that report was related to diversity and inclusion. And also, you provided a lot of data about where the company stands in terms of the kinds of people it employs, how that stacks up against U.S. companies broadly. And I wanted to talk about this in the context of Hispanic representation. Now, at the board level, as we've already talked about, you have 2 members who are Hispanic. According to that ESG report, you're doing better than the U.S. average also when it comes to Hispanics in top executive positions. But you're quite a bit below the U.S. average insofar as Hispanic representation in the next level down of managers. And no doubt that's a large group of leaders. How would you assess, and Gil, why don't we turn this over to you, but Charles, jump in, of course.
Sure.
How would you assess Prudential's performance when it comes to attracting, retaining, and promoting Hispanics?
I think I've heard Charlie say this. It is a challenge, and we are working at it. as you pointed out, at the highest levels, we've been successful. But it's that pipeline that we are concerned about. And by publishing this information, one, it provides us at the board level, for example, because the board doesn't normally see EEO1 data. And the fact that we published it for the world to see, I think, was a courageous decision on our part. Very few companies have done it, and many have actually resisted it for a variety of reasons. And having chaired the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I understand the pluses and minuses of the data and how useful it is. But I think that's the challenge. The challenge is, how do you fill those ranks to build that pipeline?
So what I would say is, as I said in the beginning, we are completely transparent with the board, and we're completely transparent, period. And so we publish this data. It shows we have work to do. It is not for want of trying. And we have all sorts of programs for recruiting, for retaining people. But the results matter. And we don't have the results that we want. And so this is basically showing that, and that, as Gil said, we have work to do. So we are working on it, and again, it's not for want of trying, but we have to have better results.
Charlie, what are the maybe challenges and opportunities for the recruitment, retention, and advancement of Hispanics at Prudential, or perhaps in financial services more broadly? Why is there not more success?
It's if I knew the answer, we'd have more success, right? So we recruit, we go to a lot of different associations, whether it's the Association of Latino Professionals for America or the Hispanic National Bar Association. We look at retention for professional development. We have specific programs for the Latinx community. We invest in programs like Year Up to try and get more people involved. We hold an annual Hispanic Latino student summit for college students. So we're doing all sorts of things, but we don't have the results yet. So I wish there was a specific answer that I could give you, but we just need to do more, and we need to try even harder than we are. But we are doing, I can't emphasize enough how much we're doing, because this is an area that we need to improve on.
We're going to turn to audience questions in just a moment, but I wanted to get back to something that you alluded to earlier, Charlie. And I guess this is related to the topic of corporate citizenship and how that affects decision-making at Prudential. Prudential's obviously involved extensively in Newark and beyond. Could you just talk about corporate citizenship?
Sure. This is a very large part of who we are. And many employees, if you ask them, why do you work at Prudential, they will tell you it's because of our purpose. Not only our purpose for our customers, but our purpose for the communities in which we live and work. Right before the pandemic, Gil, I think it may have been one of the last events we went to, was down in Washington, where we celebrated the fact that our impact investing portfolio is now $1 billion that we've invested in communities around the world. And so it is just part of who we are to invest in the communities in which we live and work, and to care for them, both from a dollars point of view as well as a volunteer point of view. Many of us volunteer in the communities to do different things, and it's part of the ethos of the company.
Let me get to some questions that both of you will be equipped to answer here. Let's go with a question from Carmen Kingston, who asks, considering the current environment, how much time do you dedicate to discuss talent and diversity? Has this been a topic that has taken a more critical role on the agenda?
And that, I think we mean the board agenda. Gil, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think we sort of referenced that in the very beginning. We talked about how, because our board is so diverse, it's something that is, I don't know, we each individually talk about all the time. It's just it's not a separate item. It's although we do dedicate a board meeting where we do deep dives on talent and diversity, but the topic is intertwined in every discussion about a business move, a strategic move. Who's going to run that operation? Who's going to take lead on this initiative? What does that team look like? How important, that it's important that team, be reflective of the customer base, be reflective of our community. So again, it's not taking on a more critical role. It just has been for us a critical topic. Throughout my tenure, and certainly over the last 5 to 6 years, it's something as a chair of the governance committee I talk about at every board meeting.
Let's turn to another question from the audience. I'm not sure who asked this question, but it says, I am the only person of color on my corporate board. Can you give me advice on how I balance talking about diversity on my board while assuring the other board directors respect my business and financial talents? Related to that, also, I was curious about how onboarding happens and how you create a sense of inclusion on the board, especially given that you've had so much turnover over the past 5 years.
I'd love to answer that question because, the bottom line is that you cannot and will not be successful as a business in the 21st century in this global world if you do not reflect a diverse workforce, a diverse customer base. The two go hand in hand. So they're not separate. So whenever I've talked about it, I've talked about how it's imperative that we have a diverse board, that we have a diverse workforce, an executive, team, because that is going to guarantee our success. Period. That is a bottom line issue. And so I don't see the two as separate. I understand that you don't want to be pigeonholed, and no one wants to be the diversity person on the board. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important that you have multiple individuals representing multiple, viewpoints and different groups, because that eases that tension. You're not the only one on the board who's expected to speak on those issues. With respect to the onboarding, I take that very seriously. So I've served on the governance committee for a number of years. I've chaired it, I think, for 5 or 6 years. And so I make it my job, and it's been really tough the last year, but to spend a lot of time with individuals just on an individual basis. And I miss that because we're not together. We do have a formal onboarding process. So we do assign individuals within the executive team to particular board members so that they can learn more about the business. We can tap into their experiences. So Charlie mentioned the newest director who comes from the tech world, and she is very savvy, and obviously digital is where you've got to go. And so we've put her in touch with folks in that team as well as throughout the business, so that she learns about the business. We get information from her and insights from her. But what's missing is that those soft skill, not soft, the time in between meetings, the walk from one committee to the other, when you're chit-chatting at lunch or at dinner, where you have the opportunity to get to know people. And I really do spend a lot of time trying to get to know folks and understanding them so that this board can continue to gel and work together as a team. Because if you can't work together as a team, then it's all for naught.
So just a couple of other things on that. One, when we bring on a new director, Gil made the point, and I think it's a great one, that all the committee chairs talk to the new director first, before offering them the directorship. So, because cultural fit is so important, the belief in the purpose, the dynamic of the board, to make sure we keep the board, the special culture that we have about the board. Once the director comes on board, then we have a whole onboarding process where he or she meets all of the senior management. They go through days, literally days and days of training where different people from the company tutor them, give them decks and walk them through the decks on each of the businesses, each of the corporate functions. so that when they come to a board member, they have more than just a rudimentary understanding of the company. They've really they have hundreds of pages of materials they've read, so they can begin to add value very quickly. So we, as Gil said, we have a whole onboarding process, but even before that, we make sure that there's a real fit with the board dynamic.
One more question. This is from Daniela Gonzalez, who asks, can you touch on how the board went about CEO succession planning when it came to appointing Charlie as CEO?
So, yeah, happy to do that, since I was actually involved in that. Obviously the entire board was, but our lead director at the time asked me and others to sort of help with the process. And so what we did was, we knew we had internal candidates, Charlie being one of them, because that's part, again, of our talent review, annual talent review, and ongoing sort of attention to talent is such that we're trying to always build and keep a strong bench. But in addition to that, we did not do an external search per se in a formal way. What we did was, we did ask for a scan. We wanted to make sure that is there someone out there who has the set of skills that we think we need going forward. And so what we asked this search firm to do was to sort of give us a scan, who's out there. And they came back with a number of names. We reviewed them at the board level over multiple meetings. So this process, it took us about 2 years. And so when our prior CEO said to us privately, this is what I'm thinking of doing, stepping down, announcing it in about a year, and he actually pushed it back because we spent a lot of time on this process. So that's what we did. And so we made sure we looked outside, as I said, not in a formal way, but just to scan the environment. And then we did an external, we did a substantial review process internally. Charlie probably had more meetings and dinners and lunches with us individually than he ever wanted. And so that was the process that we used, and then announced it. And then there was an overlap transition period where our former CEO remained as executive chairman and Charlie as CEO.
But just to add to that, I mean, the former CEO and chairman had talked to me 7-8 years before that, thinking about succession planning and what jobs I might take running the U.S. and then running international, to be a candidate, not to be the CEO, but to be a candidate for the CEO. Just a small humorous story, but even before I was formally CEO, which took place in, I think, January 1, 2 years ago. So in the November meeting before that, I was asked, what does your succession plan look like? So before I had even taken the job, we were already talking about the nurturing of the next generation to make sure that they would have the kind of experiences required in order to be candidates. So the board takes succession planning extremely seriously at all levels, not just the CEO level, but 2 or 3 levels down. And we spend a tremendous amount of time on our talent to make sure that we're developing talent in the right way.
Charlie, let me get one more audience question in for you, and then I have another question for Gil. This question from the audience is, I joined a new company where my CEO allows me to serve on a corporate board. My prior employer CEO did not allow his senior team to serve on a corporate board. Can you talk about the benefits of allowing your senior executives to serve on corporate boards? How many is enough for an executive?
Well, I would say 1 is enough. But I do think that there is benefit, because you don't know what you don't know. And from what I understand, and I do not serve on a board, I may one day, but I do not serve on a board at this point. But from what I understand from many of my colleagues in other firms that do, you gain tremendous experience by just seeing how another board operates. You can see what you like, you can see what you don't like, you can bring back best practices. but I always think it's good to have an external perspective. So my personal opinion, Gil, you may want to weigh in here, would be one board, very carefully chosen, but it really gives you it would give you an external perspective.
Yeah, and I agree with that, not to prolong it, but in fact, and the only issue is, sort of the logistics around it, the time commitment, the number of your senior team who serve on external boards, how that looks to your investors, but yes, I think overall, conceptually, yes, we agree. I think it's valuable.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to take one last question from the audience. It's a good one. Where do you turn for inspiration and best practices for continuous improvement related to DEI?
I'm not going to tell you who I steal my ideas from. No, I think I think this is the kind of thing that you do share. So I serve on a number of diversity advisory boards for a number of global companies, and so you hear from how they're doing in their industry. Every industry is different. Every company is different, and the pressures, the challenges are all very different. And so I read a lot. I talk to folks in the field. I stay in touch with them and those networks, and see how things might apply in the context of Prudential, for example. But there are a lot of good ideas out there and a lot of smart people, and I just try to listen.
And I do exactly the same thing. So I make it a practice to talk to many of my peers around the world. Twice a year, I'll call them and say, how are you? What's going on? How are you thinking about this issue? I always bring up IND. I always say IND because I think inclusion, again, the things we talked about earlier about inclusion, but and that's one of the sort of standing agenda topics that I'll have on the list, just to compare notes, because as Gil said, you can learn so much from others in terms of perspective. What are they doing? How are they doing things differently? And you can learn a lot, and there is a lot to learn. So I think reaching out to external perspectives. The other thing I would say is we listen very hard to our employees because they have great ideas, and our business resource groups are such a resource for us in terms of thinking through issues and coming up with different ways of doing things. And so we listen hard to our employees as well.
Is it fair to say that all of your stakeholders, even just in the past couple of years since you've been CEO, Charlie, that all of your stakeholders, whether they're employees, customers, or shareholders, are requiring more, expecting more of you on the D&I front?
Without question. And we welcome that. We think it's great, both in terms of the IND question, in terms of climate change, in terms of a whole series of issues that are out there. We are being held more responsible. They want us to be more transparent, and they want us to be accountable. And I think those are all laudable asks that they're requiring of us.
Steve, I meet regularly with our institutional investors. And it's clear that those issues, in particular, the issue of disclosure of EEO-1 data, that was the item over the last year that was top of mind and that was being pushed. So in addition to ESG, but human capital management, but also transparency around your data was one that every institutional investor that I met with, and I met with probably a dozen over the last year, made that almost, it was in the top 3 items that they raised.
We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. This has been a great discussion. Thank you very much for participating. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sid Wilson.
That was a great session. I'm just so excited and thankful. So again, thank you to Prudential Financial. Special thanks to Charles Lowrey, the chairman and CEO for Prudential Financial, for my dear friend Gil Casayas, board director for Prudential Financial, and to Stephen Wisnefski from the Wall Street Journal for moderating a great session. Hope you all got a good feeling of what it's like to look into the boardroom.